Greetings, this is Jeff Riddle, the pastor of Christ Reformed Baptist Church in Louisa, Virginia. And this is going to be a spoken word version of an article that I have written. The article is titled, Does the King James Version Wrongly Translate Acts chapter 5, verse 30? And this article appeared in the Bible League Quarterly, number 499, the October to December of 2024 issue. And the written article can be found on pages 22 through 28. And so let me go ahead and pull up a PDF version of the article to share with you. And in this PDF version, some of the line spacings and tabs are a little bit off, and hopefully they match up correctly in the print version. But I just have right now the PDF version of this, draft of this. Again, the title of this article is, Does the King James Version Wrongly Translate Acts 5:30, verse 30? And this is prefaced with two citations of the verse, first from the King James Version. The God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom ye slew and hanged on a tree. And then also from the Legacy Standard Bible, the same verse, Acts chapter 5, verse 30. The God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom you put to death by hanging him on a tree. Let's begin with the introduction. The King James, or Authorized Version of the Bible, first appeared in print in 1611. It followed in the classic Tyndale, Geneva Protestant tradition of English Bible translation and quickly became the standard among English-speaking people. It has since been universally acknowledged as a literary and spiritual classic. Beginning in the late 19th century and extending up to the present, however, a concerted effort has been made to undermine and overthrow this classic version. It has been claimed first that the translation is not based on the most up-to-date modern critical text. In addition, it has been suggested that many of its translation decisions need to be updated and so-called improved. A deluge of supposedly new and improved modern English translations has saturated the market, and yet the venerable King James Version continues to stand firm in the esteem and use of many Christian readers. A charge that the KJV wrongly translates Acts chapter 5, verse 30. In this article, I want to examine a recent specific criticism that was publicly lodged against the KJV's translation of Acts chapter 5, verse 30. This charge was made on February the 18th of 2023 by internet apologist and modern critical text defender James White of Phoenix, Arizona, USA, during a moderated debate with an independent Baptist pastor, Thomas Ross. The topic of the debate was, the Legacy Standard Bible is superior to the King James Version, with White defending this thesis and Ross opposing it. Note, the Legacy Standard Bible was produced in 2021 and has been promoted by well-known American pastor John MacArthur. It is a revision of the New American Standard Bible. During his opening argument in this debate, White claimed that the Legacy Standard Bible was translationally superior to the King James Version. He offered Acts chapter 5, verse 30 as a supposed key example to illustrate this point. White explained his argument as follows. Here's a quote from him and from the PowerPoint that he used. One simple error in translation that is easily recognized but very hard to explain is Acts chapter 5, verse 30. The God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom ye slew and hanged on a tree, King James Version. Think about what that is actually saying. Look at the Legacy Standard Bible. The God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom you put to death by hanging him on a tree. And he has the participle kremasantes. The participle here, kremasantes, is the means by which he was slain, by being hung on a tree. That's the end of the quote. White then added, here's another quote, "They didn't kill him and then hang his body on a tree. The King James Version simply misses the translation of the participle. And so you have to be able to admit, yes, they missed this translation. The Legacy Standard Bible is superior here." That's the end of the quote. One should note that White's challenge is not about the King James Version's text of Acts chapter 5, verse 30, but its translation. Indeed, if one were to compare the Greek text of Acts chapter 5, verse 30 in the modern critical text with the text in the Textus Receptus, he would find it is the same. This is a translation issue, not a textual issue. According to White, the problem is found in the final phrase in the Greek original, and especially the proper translation of the participle. And I've highlighted the participle here in bold, kremasantes. Grammatically speaking, this phrase consists of a main finite verb, dia saste, followed by an adverbial participle, kremasantes. And I just noted that this transliteration should be kremasantes, and I'm not sure if that's corrected in the print version and it's just in this PDF, but anyway, we'll continue. On one hand, the King James Version renders this final phrase in English with two finite verbs having the same subject. The KJV, it's the subject ye, the you plural, connected by the conjunction and, participle in bold, whom ye slew, here it is in bold, and hanged on a tree. The Legacy Standard Bible, on the other hand, translates the final phrase with a finite verb and a participle expressing means or instrument, adding the word by. And here also the participle in question is in bold, whom you put to death by hanging him on a tree. According to White, the King James Version's translation of Acts chapter 5, verse 30 is a grammatical error. He also suggests it will cause confusion in the mind of the reader, who might think that the body of the Lord Jesus was only hung on a tree, that is the cross, after he had been put to death by some unexplained means. Such a person would supposedly not understand that Christ was put to death by means of hanging on a tree, that is to say, by crucifixion. The classic Protestant English Bible translation tradition of Acts chapter 5, verse 30. To examine the validity of White's charge, we begin by noting that the translation of Acts 5:30 in the King James Version is not an innovation unique to it, but that it follows what might be called the classic Protestant English Bible translation tradition of this verse. In other words, the King James Version translators were simply following the translation tradition that had been established in previous English Protestant Bibles, stretching back to Tyndale. Here are a few examples with the phrase in question, the participle in question, placed in bold here in the text. First, we've got the Tyndale New Testament of 1534. Here's the Daniel modern spelling edition of that. The God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom ye slew and hanged on tree or on a tree. The Geneva Bible, 1560, 1599, from the Tolle Lege edition, says, the God of our fathers hath raised up Jesus, whom ye slew and hanged on a tree. The Bishop's Bible of 1568, and I access this from the Textus Receptus Bibles.com website. The God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom ye slew and hanged on a tree. And the King James Version, of course, reflects this as well. It's in this Tyndale Geneva standard Protestant English translation tradition. The God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom he slew and hanged on a tree. The previous English Protestant Bibles uniformly rendered the participle as a finite verb, and ye hanged on a tree. White, then, is not merely charging the King James Version of Acts chapter 5, verse 30 with error, but the entire early English Protestant translation tradition. the modern English Bible translation tradition of Acts chapter 5, verse 30. We turn next to examine modern English translations of Acts chapter 5, verse 30. Here, we likewise discover that the Legacy Standard Bible is also not presenting anything novel in its translation of Acts 5:30. By translating the participle not as a finite verb, but as a participle of means, it is simply following what one might call the modern English Bible translation tradition. Signs of departure from the classic approach appear in the English Revised Version of 1881 and its American counterpart, the American Standard Version of 1901. And so first, the English Revised Version reads, "The God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom ye slew, hanging him on a tree." And the American Standard Version of 1901 reads, "The God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom ye slew, hanging him on a tree." In both the English Revised Version and the American Standard Version, the participle is simply rendered with an ing ending as hanging, though without supplying the word by, which would make explicit an emphasis on means or instrument. Later, modern English translations began adding by, offering a more overt interpretation of the participle as expressing means, by hanging. Compare these translations of Acts 5, verse 30 in several modern versions. The Revised Standard Version of 1952, "The God of our fathers raised Jesus, whom you killed by hanging him on a tree." This says bold added, but I see there isn't a bold in these first two examples. And again, I hope this is just a issue with the PDF version, and hopefully in the print version it appears there. But let's look at the NIV of 1984 and 2011. "The God of our ancestors raised Jesus from the dead, whom you killed by hanging him on a cross." The English Standard Version 2001, "The God of our fathers raised Jesus, whom you killed by hanging him on a tree." And the New American Standard Bible of 2020, "The God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom you put to death by hanging him on a cross." And again, some spacing and tab issues on this PDF version. This is even true of the New King James Version and the Modern English Version, both of which generally follow the received text in the New Testament. Again, the issue with Acts chapter 5, verse 30 is not text, but translation. So if we compare the New King James Version of 1982, "The God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom you murdered by hanging him on a tree," and the Modern English Version of 2014, "The God of our fathers raised Jesus, whom you killed by hanging on a tree." The Legacy Standard Bible's rendering of Acts chapter 5, verse 30, therefore, is not presenting something new or innovative, but simply following this, what I call modern English Bible translation tradition. Does the King James Version wrongly translate Acts chapter 5, verse 30? The question remains whether the King James Version translation is an error which modern translations are properly correcting. In his 2023 debate, James White declared with confidence that, there should only be one that the KJV so-called misses the proper translation of the participle in Acts 5:30 and risks causing confusion in the mind of the reader. In a series of Twitter/X posts following the White-Ross debate, Timothy Decker, a Greek teacher at an online seminary, voiced his agreement with White that, quote, "The Legacy Standard Bible is a superior translation to the King James Version at Acts chapter 5, verse 30, end quote. Decker later added regarding the King James Version translation of Acts 5:30, quote, "Syntactically, that is not," and the "not" in all caps, "viable. It would be special pleading at best to take that participle as an independent participle. No Greek speaker would ever hear it that way," end quote. Are the claims of White and Decker valid? In order to evaluate their assertions, it will be helpful to consult a reliable published work on the syntax of biblical Greek. One such well-respected work is James A. Brooks and Carlton L. Winbury's Syntax of New Testament Greek, known by many students simply as Brooks and Winbury. And I haven't been reading the footnotes, but you can see that this book was published by the University Press of America in 1979. This volume includes an extended discussion of the adverbial participle, that is, when a participle is used alongside a main finite verb, as in Acts chapter 5, verse 30. The authors note that adverbial participles in the New Testament are, quote, frequent and complicated, end quote, offering 10 possible subdivisions for understanding, quote, the thought expressed, end quote, when this construction is used. The 10 subdivisions noted by Brooks and Winbury are the following. And I've put in bold the two that are going to be considered for this, for the translation of Acts 5:30. But they list, here are the possibilities: temporal, telic, causal, conditional, concessive, instrumental, modal, complementary, circumstantial, and imperatival. It is their discussion of the instrumental and circumstantial subdivisions that will be most relevant for our inquiry. First, regarding the instrumental participle, Brooks and Winbury observe, quote, the participle indicates the means or agent by which or by whom the action of the main verb is carried out. The word by will ordinarily be found in the translation, end quote. According to the authors, by blanking, verbing, is a grammatically possible interpretation of an adverbial participle. This is precisely the interpretation of the participle which appears in what I call the modern English Bible translation tradition of Acts chapter 5, verse 30. The final phrase in the Legacy Standard Bible following in this train thus reads, by hanging him on a tree. The instrumental participle is not, however, the only translational possibility offered by Brooks and Winbury. Second, regarding the circumstantial participle, Brooks and Winbury observe the following, quote, a participle may be used to indicate an action which accompanies the action of the main verb. The actions indicated by the participle constitute, the actions constitute should be instead of constitutes, the actions indicated by the participle constitute a rather loose addition to that of the main verb. The participle indicates something else that happened, an additional fact or thought, an incidental fact. There is no certain parallel in English, and it is difficult to translate literally. The best procedure is to translate the participle as though it were a finite verb, and to connect it to the main verb by supplying the word and, end quote. This describes precisely, in fact, the way in which the participle is interpreted in the classic so-called Protestant English Bible translation tradition of Acts 5:30, including in the King James Version. According to Brooks and Winbury, and contrary to White and Decker, this is a perfectly acceptable and grammatically fitting translation for an adverbial participle. What about White's further suggestion that the King James Version's rendering of Acts 5:30 might confuse the reader, causing him to think that the Lord Jesus was only hung on a tree or the cross after he had died? Such confusion hardly seems likely when one considers that any reader, with even the most general familiarity with the Christian tradition concerning the life of Jesus, would understand that he had been put to death by crucifixion and that his body was not merely placed on the tree or the cross after his death. More light from Acts chapter 2, verse 23. More light can also be shed on the translation of Acts chapter 5, verse 30 by comparing the translation of Acts chapter 2, verse 23. In Acts chapter 2, verse 23, in his Pentecost sermon, Peter declared, him being delivered by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God, ye have taken, and by wicked hands have crucified and slain. And again, that's the King James Version of Acts chapter 2, verse 30. And I've put in bold that last phrase, have crucified and slain. The final phrase here is another example of a Greek construction that involves an adverbial participle and a main finite verb. Ye have crucified and slain. And here it is in the Greek, prospe kantes ane on ilete. Though in this case, the participle precedes the verb. There's the participle prospe kantes preceding the second person plural verb. It consists of an aorist participle, prospe kantes, from the verb meaning to fasten to, which refers to Christ being fastened or nailed to the cross, and the main finite verb, anelete, a second aorist verb in the second person plural meaning ye slew. As in Acts chapter 5, verse 30, the King James Version of Acts 2:23 translates the adverbial participle circumstantially as a finite verb, crucified, with the conjunction and the finite verb slain. Ye have crucified and slain. Of further interest for our examination is the Legacy Standard Bible's translation of Acts chapter 2, verse 23, which reads, this man, delivered over by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God, you nailed to a cross by the hands of lawless men and put him to death. At Acts chapter 2, verse 23, the Legacy Standard Bible does not, in fact, translate the adverbial participle as instrumental, as it did in Acts chapter 5, verse 30, but as circumstantial. It renders the participle as a finite verb. You nailed to a cross with the conjunction and the finite verb, and put him to death. So it reads, you nailed to a cross and put him to death. This demonstrates that the Legacy Standard Bible also sometimes renders adverbial participles as circumstantial rather than instrumental. For an example of a modern English translation that renders the participle in Acts 2:23 as instrumental rather than circumstantial, one may consult the Contemporary English Bible, the CEB, which translates the final phrase, you had Jesus killed by nailing him to a cross. Conclusion. This brief examination has demonstrated that any claim that the King James Version translation of Acts chapter 5, verse 30 misses a proper rendering or is somehow grammatically inaccurate is completely false. The King James Version translation of Acts chapter 5, verse 30, in fact, reflects the classic Protestant English Bible translation tradition. According to contemporary experts in the syntax of New Testament Greek, like Brooks and Winbury, its translation of the adverbial participle as circumstantial is perfectly appropriate. Even the Legacy Standard Bible renders a participle in a similar manner in Acts chapter 2, verse 23. It is my hope that this brief study might remind us to give careful scrutiny to contemporary claims made against the accuracy of the King James Version's translation decisions before accepting them at face value. As Solomon said in Proverbs 18, verse 17, he that is first in his own cause seemeth just, but his neighbor cometh and searcheth him. And with that, we bring the reading of this article to a conclusion. Hope you're able to follow that. I will be placing this PDF on my academia.edu page. As you see, this was a draft of it, and there were a couple places that need some correction. And I hope those corrections were made in the print edition. But I wanted to go ahead and share this PDF draft of it as I had opportunity. Hope this little article will be helpful to those who are reading, and I'll look forward to speaking to you in the next podcast that appears on this Word Magazine channel. Till we meet again, take care, and may the Lord richly bless you.